Well, welcome everyone. This is Hillary Topper for We Are Triathletes. And today we are with Coach Tim Dells of CBMultisport and also the head coach of We Are Triathletes to talk all about the bike. And without further ado, I will introduce and welcome Coach Tim.
Hello, everybody. I'm sure some of you have seen me before, and thank you again for having me, Hillary. I'm happy to talk about all things cycling today.
So let's start with, I want to start at the beginning, okay? Let's talk about the clips, right? Do you really, I saw yesterday at the Smith Point Triathlon, a lot of people were there without clips. They were, they just used regular pedals.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really need clips? And if so, how much more efficient do they make you?
Right. So clip-in pedals, do you need them? No. Does having clip-in pedals allow you to generate more power when you ride? No, they don't. I can generate as many watts on flat pedals as I can with clip-ins. And I actually alternate between flat pedals and clip-ins when I mountain bike. When I race mountain bikes, ride single speed mountain bikes and things like that. And I will use flat pedals mostly for mountain biking because it makes me use proper form and technique. And when you're riding in the woods, it's mostly about form and technique. So no, you don't need them. They are good to have because when you're clipped into your pedals, you're going to be mechanically more efficient. Because bikes are mechanical. It's not like running or swimming where everything that is created to, form-wise is done by you. You control everything about your form when running. You control everything about your form when swimming. Well, bike is a mechanical piece of equipment. It has gearing and things like that. So you have to work within the parameters of that piece of equipment. So being clipped in keeps your ankles in line, your feet facing the right way. If your pedals are set up correctly, it makes sure that your legs are going up and down and not in and out and all over the place. They tend to make a lot of people, especially beginners and intermediates, more efficient climbers because it takes a while to develop a really nice round pedal stroke. And if you have a good round pedal stroke, then riding flats are fine. But you definitely climb better with them if you're not, super efficient. And a lot of people, it's kind of counterintuitive. You feel really uncomfortable when you're first clipping in and getting used to them, right? You feel like you have less control. But after you ride them for a while, most people feel like they're more controlled because they're more connected to the bike. But no, they are definitely not a requirement by any stretch of the imagination.
So let's take it a little bit more and get more advanced. And my question here is a power meter. Do you really need a power meter? And what exactly does it do?
So there are two levels of owning a power meter. And I feel like I should coin this phrase because I've been using it a lot lately and I've never heard it before. Power meters work two ways. They're either tools or they're toys. For 95% of triathletes, a power meter is just a toy. It is a number it spits out an arbitrary number that you look at afterwards and you say, oh, well, I did 200 watts today, or my max was 250 or whatever. People don't know how to train with them. As a tool for training and racing, a power meter is great because most people train and race with either by the way their body feels or by heart rate. Well, your heart rate is affected by a whole lot of things. There's a whole lot of variables. Did you drink coffee or something with caffeine? Did you have an alcoholic beverage the night before? That elevates your heart rate. How did you sleep? What's the temperature outside? All of those things affect heart rate. So if you're pacing by heart rate, there's a lot of variables you have to account for or with. Power is power. It's 100 watts is 100 watts. It doesn't matter if it's snowing outside or 100 degrees. It doesn't matter if you were up all night drinking or if you had 12 hours of sleep. 100 watts is 100 watts on a power meter. So if you want to train and race the most consistently, then it is a great tool. You have to know what your zones and power numbers and how they all correlate to do that, which is why for most people it's just a toy. And power meters can work a few different ways. You can get them as a pedal, like it can be in the pedal, like Garmin makes them, PowerTap makes them, a bunch of other companies make them. You can get chain rings that read power. You can get them inside of the crank. You can get them inside of the rear hub. There's a lot of different options. And basically what they're doing is they're reading the force that you are putting down while you're riding. Ones that read from the hub are different than ones that read from the pedals, right? Ones that read at the hub tend to be a little lower because you're losing power and efficiency through the drivetrain to get back to the hub. Ones that run off of chain rings, they're using stress that's actually put on the chain and the flex on the rings themselves. So they all read a little different, which is fine. If you're using one, all that matters is you're using the same type of one each time. So the number itself doesn't really matter. It could be 150 or it could be 300. That number is all relative to you. So as long as you're measuring with the same device every time, then it really doesn't matter what the actual output number is.
So with that, you're using a power meter and you're trying to, stay within, I guess, zone 2 or zone 3 when you're in a race, right? How do you actually get beyond that? Like how do you up your zones, like to make it more efficient in terms of power? How do we do that?
So you tend to use a 5-zone setup for power the same way you do for heart rate. So it's just done with wattage instead of heart rate beats per minute. It's different watts. And so the way that you create more power is you have to make yourself more physically stronger, right? So like when you're doing aerobic training, when you first start doing this stuff, you can only run, just as an arbitrary number, let's say you run a 14-minute mile in zone 2, right? Totally random numbers. Well, the more you run, eventually you're going to be running a 12-minute mile in zone 2, right? Because you're training at that effort level and that consistency, and you're becoming more efficient at it. It works the same way for power. If you only train, as again, random numbers, at 200 watts, well, you can't expect yourself to then get to the point where you're going to race at 300, right? So you have to build that same kind of efficiency and consistency. It's just you're using a different manner of measurement. But the parallels to how they work are it's almost the same. It's just a totally different device for measuring.
So how do you get faster on the bike by using power?
Well, one is the way you structure your workouts. So like me, for example, I come from a cycling background. I've had spent a lot of time on a bike, tens of thousands of miles on bikes. I can ride, at a much higher heart rate and power threshold for an extended period of time because I have been practicing doing that for a long period of time. I would do, like I race a half Ironman, and using a 1 to 5 heart rate scale or power scale, I am in low zone 4 for 56 miles, which is high, right?
It's hard.
Right. Most people are like, there's no way I could do that. My speed difference from an Olympic to a half is maybe a third to maybe a half of a mile an hour difference. The intensity is almost the same. But it's because I've been practicing, and it started as 1 by 10 minute, 10-minute interval at this heart rate or power threshold, right? At that high zone 3, low zone 4. And then it was 1 by 15 minutes, 2 by 10 minutes, 2 by 15 minutes, 3 by, and so you start to create a ladder, and a structure to be able to do that. With that, though, you also have to make sure that you rest, because like if I go out and I'm training for a half Ironman and I go out for a ride, I'll go ride for 4 hours and I'll do, 3 by 45 minutes at race pace effort, right? Those are really long intervals. So for a couple of days afterwards, my workouts are extremely easy because you have to give yourself the time to recover and relax. You can't just stack them on top of each other because you're going to burn yourself out. You'll end up injured, that kind of stuff. And, those are the things that I've learned over time that now obviously I give to people in my coach, through coaching. But yeah, create a plan. You have to make a plan. You can't just go out and ride and expect to get better. You actually have to make a plan.
So what you're saying is that you really don't need a power meter to do this. You could actually use your heart rate as a tool to improve on the bike. Oh
yeah, heart rate is by far the most inexpensive and best tool to use. If you most GPS watches now have heart rate monitors built right in the wrist, or some people still use a strap. Like I use a strap when I ride, mostly just because I don't want the watch on. I have a bike computer and a strap, and I just don't like having a watch on my wrist if I'm going out riding. But yeah, I mean, I use my power meter mostly as a secondary tool, even for me. And that is, I live somewhere that's really hilly. I'm doing a really hilly race or a race that's known for being exceptionally windy or something like that. I'm primarily still going to follow my heart rate. And then I use my power numbers as a secondary number, basically to make sure that, hey, my heart rate is down, but this power number is really high. Something's askew. It's a secondary factor. Or I'm coming into a big hill. Your heart rate takes time to go up. Your power goes up automatically. I need to make sure that I'm not basically burning a match going up the hill and riding the hill way too hard. So even I still primarily use heart rate.
Let's talk a little bit about shifting gears, right? Shifting gears on flats, shifting gears against the wind, uphill, downhill. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the first thing is there's this misconception, right, that the harder the gear you ride, the stronger you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
Ride bigger gears. It's like lifting heavier weights, right? That's what people think. All that riding bigger gears does is wear you out and cause knee pain and hip pain and back pain and make you a miserable person.
I know that.
Right. I mean, that's all it does. The stronger you are, the bigger gears you can naturally ride, but that is by no means how you should train. My bikes have 22 gears on them, right? I got 11 in the back and 2 on the front. I use all 22 almost every time I ride, unless I'm out somewhere that's really flat, but here where I live at home, I'll use all 22 gears. Doesn't matter. The way you should ride is you should never be struggling to turn your pedals, if possible. Obviously, if you go into a really steep hill and you're all out of gears and you're kind of, mashing your way up because you're just trying not to fall over because it's that steep, sure, right? There's exceptions to that rule. But when you're riding, you should never feel like you really have to push hard on the pedals. Cadence is a really good, if you could buy one tool for improving your shifting on the bike, it would be a cadence sensor. Most amateurs ride way too low of a cadence as a rule. And most of them ride around 70 to 75. That's pretty common. Professional cyclists average around 100
Wow.
to 110. That's about the average. I average, like in a long course race, I average between 95 and 100. And it doesn't matter if it's flat or if it's hilly or what. That's where I average. The shorter the race gets, my cadence gets lower because I am pushing harder, you know, so I'm driving a harder gear a little slower purposefully. But most people ride way too low. So if you can get your cadence up, what that does is, A, it's way easier on your joints. It's way easier on your muscles because it becomes more aerobic instead of anaerobic or muscular, which will then allow you to do it for a very long time. The other thing is any kind of little undulations, bumps in the road, you know, things that are not severe, you know, just kind of rises and things like that. If you have a higher cadence, it smooths and flattens everything out. You then never get to a point where, oh my God, I have to shift. If you're riding at 90 and then the road steps up a little bit and you go down to 85, you're fine. But if you're riding at 70 and you roll into that same bump and you go down to 65, well, now you're working way too hard. So higher cadence is great. It does feel tough at first because you feel, you know, it almost feels unnatural. You're spinning too fast. For my athletes, I have a workout I call a cadence ladder where they'll warm up. It's typically done on a trainer and they'll go, you know, 80 RPM, 100 RPM, 85 RPM, 95 RPM, you know, and they'll go different ranges from basically 70 to 110. Not all of them can hit 110. If you've never done it before, getting to 100 is kind of tough, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more you can keep your cadence up, the easier everything gets. So that, and the cadence sensor is good for that. It makes shifting easier. Drop chains go away because you're not waiting till the last second to shift. You know, you don't have to shift near as frequently because you can handle the natural changes in terrain without shifting gears. It really smooths out your whole riding.
So what you're saying here is go into an easier gear every time you ride so that you could turn over faster, right? And how does that affect the watts? Like I find that when I'm trying to get my watts up, I need to go into a harder gear. So I'm pumping, you know, and my legs at the end of the workout are killing me, right?
Yep.
So that's what you're talking about here.
So yeah, and so I can ride the same, if I need to do super high power numbers, right? Like if I'm sprinting or if I'm going into a big hill or I'm doing like a maximum all out effort, I will go into a really hard gear at not 100. I'll probably be at like 80 RPMs, right? To get into like that, for me, 15, 17, 1800 watts, right? If I'm doing it, but that's short sprint, right? But when I normally ride, you know, race effort, say for like a half Ironman or something where I'm holding 280 to 290 watts for 2.5 hours, you know, 2 hours, 20 minutes, 2.5 hours. It's way more comfortable for me to hold that at 95 RPMs than it is at 80 because you're still going to generate the same power, whether you're here or there. The difference is here that at the higher RPM, your power is being aided by cadence and momentum. And here the power is all muscular. So this will fatigue you way faster than this will. And so, like I said, if I'm doing short course racing, yeah, my RPMs go down. I push higher watts. I'm only going to, you know, if I'm doing an Olympic, I'm on the bike for 55 minutes to an hour. There's a big difference between that and 2.5 hours in terms of what I can do. So my speed doesn't get much faster, like I told you earlier, to do an Olympic. But the way I ride it is totally different because I don't have to run 13 miles off of it, you know. So, yeah, definitely focus on cadence, getting your cadence up if possible.
And what would you suggest? What would you suggest be the ideal cadence for every ride?
So it's Cadence is very personal and individual. I've ridden everything from 70 to 120, trying to find different things. Most people get comfortable between 85 and 95.
Okay.
I tend to ride, like I said, a touch higher than that. I ride 95 to 100 typically, and then down around 90 when I'm racing. But most people, if they tend to fall between 85 and 95, is comfortable. That feels like a long way away from 70 to 75 when you first try it, but you can always go down to an easier gear. Whether if you're doing 70 RPMs in one gear and then you go up a gear to an easier one and you do 90 RPM, you're still traveling about the same speed. The difference is you're now using your lungs instead of your legs. And
Right.
you know, our lungs will last way longer than your muscles will.
That's exactly what I'm doing wrong, is pushing on a harder gear.
Most people do. And there is a place for doing a hard gear. Like if I'm doing strength work, I'll do up to 10-minute intervals where I'm down at 70 RPM and I'm grinding, but that's not riding. That is like going to the gym and doing monster weights, right? And you're doing 3 rounds of 5 reps. You know, it's like the equivalent of doing that. I'm doing it specifically for muscular adaptation and not for riding and efficiency.
So Sandy asks, what does cadence sensor look like? Does it attach to the bike?
Sure. So they're either 1 or 2 pieces, Sandy. If it's a 2-piece, there will be a little magnet that goes on your back of your crank arm, so on the inside facing towards the frame. And then the other part of the sensor will actually go on the, they call them chain stays. It's the 2 tubes on the frame that go from the bottom where the pedals are back towards the rear wheel. So you would have 1 sensor on there and 1 on the crank arm itself, and what happens is every time the crank arm goes by that sensor, it'll read it. So it'll start counting revolutions per minute based on that. If it's a 1-piece one, they're usually maybe 1.5 inches long by 1/2 inch wide, and it just mounts on the inside of the crank arm just the same, but it's using strain gauges and a accelerometer to measure it instead of a static point that it's coming to.
So Brian says if you have a Garmin watch, it's easy to add onto.
Yeah, so Garmin watches and Garmin devices are set up to read cadence, you know, and any triathlon or smartwatch or anything like that from Garmin is set up to read it. And Garmin actually also makes their own cadence sensors. You can find them on their website. I suggest you go to Amazon because they're cheaper, because Garmin overcharges for everything on their website. But you can get it one directly from Garmin. It doesn't have to be a Garmin. What you want to make sure you see is anything that is labeled ANT plus, A-N-T with a plus, then that will communicate with your Garmin device no matter what brand it is.
Do you see what she writes?
Yeah, she's got a Wahoo sensor. I'm assuming you're not talking about the Wahoo ticker, which is a heart rate monitor, but Wahoo does make a cadence sensor. A lot of times you can buy it in a bundle with their smart trainers, which I'm assuming that may be where it came from. If that is what you have, yes, that will work just the same and will still pair with a Garmin or any other smart device.
So let's talk a little bit about hill repeats. Are they really necessary? They're horrible. Are they really necessary?
So I never, as a coach, will schedule bike hill repeats for my clients. And the reason why is, A, you need a hill that's long enough. B, you need a hill that's the right grade to do it, right? Because you need, if you're doing a hill repeat, typically you need it to be something you can get into a rhythm on of some kind while pedaling. And C, most people tend to hate, a lot of people don't like going downhill. So asking someone to climb up and then turn around and go right back down while they're gassed and out of breath is kind of it's a tough thing to do. Me personally, I love hills. I don't ride them near as fast as I did when I was a younger and smaller guy, but I love them. So like that workout I was telling you earlier where I do low cadence, high power kind of stuff, I will go do that on hills because I enjoy being outside better than being on the trainer. But it's the same adaptation as riding a really low gear and grinding it along. You're building strength in the muscle itself. But obviously on the trainer, it's easier. You don't then have to turn around and go downhill. You don't have to worry about falling over, you know, or any of the things that can come with hill repeat. Now, if you're planning on riding, if you live somewhere that's hilly or you race courses that tend to have hills because that's what's around you, then I would suggest doing hill repeats, not to go hard and fast, but simply to learn proper form when you're climbing. Because there are things you can do going uphill to make going uphill a whole lot easier. Like sliding your butt back to the back edge of your saddle. Most people ride towards the front of their saddle, right? Well, when you're climbing, all that does is engage your quads only. So you're using one muscle group. If you slide back, what it does is it effectively lengthens your pedal stroke because you get further away from the crank. So you then incorporate your glutes and your hamstrings and your calves. And so you use all of your major muscle groups instead of one. So hill repeats are good for that. The other thing you can do is when you're climbing is make sure to drop your heels. If you've ever ridden a horse, they always tell you to keep your heels down. If you haven't ridden a horse, I tell people that when they're pedaling through, try to think about scraping mud off of the bottom of your shoes, right? Like you have mud on your shoes and you're scraping them on the grass. Because it does the same thing. When you drop your heels, it engages different muscle groups. Instead of holding on to the hoods and squeezing for dear life, which keeps you hunched over, hold on to the flat on the top of your handlebars. It allows you to sit up, which allows you to breathe better. Instead of being in this position, when you do this, it drops your shoulders out of your ears, so it relaxes your upper body. So riding hills are good for technique, but you don't really need them to get faster. You know, from a strength standpoint, you can do almost the same work on your trainer, but you can't really simulate climbing inside. So if you're doing form stuff, then riding hills is great for that.
Okay. Sandy wanted to know where you train clients, not online, but real outdoor training.
Yeah, so I am based in Maryland. I work with clients in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Delaware, DC, regularly. But then I also do training camps throughout the year in different places. We do one in the wintertime in Claremont, Florida. We do one here on the Eastern Shore in the summertime. We typically do one in Colorado. We didn't do it this year, but we should go back to doing one in Colorado next year. So the camps we move around, and then as far as meeting clients face to face, it's regional here to kind of the Mid-Atlantic. I will travel for form sessions, you know, to meet up with people and work on run form, swim form, whatever. Do heart rate or lactate threshold testing, things like that. Like I'll travel for people if they want to do, let's get together and do a weekend or one day where we're going to do a multitude of things or stuff like that. But from the day to day, it's mostly just regional here in the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, we've got to get you out here to Long Island.
I can do that. I could totally. I mean, that's only, 4 hours for me to get to Long Island. I mean, I go farther than that just to go camping. So, I mean, I could easily come out and do, you know, an extended weekend or
Well, I'll post it to the group and see if anybody would be interested.
Yeah, if there's interest, I can.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, if there's enough interest, I got no problem hopping in the car.
So I'm going to open it up to you guys and just, if you could just, just message in the chat and then I'll unmute you. Let me know.
And it says, Sandy did ask, on the subject of descents, how do you be less nervous?
It's a good question.
So the easiest way to become more comfortable descending is to do it over and over and over and over again, right? It's like anything else. The more you try it, the more comfortable you get. Not always the most practical for people to do it that way. The best thing that you can do to make yourself more competent and comfortable as a descender is to become a better bike handler. The more you know how to move a bike and how the bike reacts, the easier everything gets. I always tell people if there's only one thing you're going to do, it's to go get a mountain bike because learning to ride on uneven surfaces changes everything. Obviously, that's asking people a lot of times to go get another bike or they don't have access trails, things like that. Doesn't really work. But when you're descending, there's a couple of things you can do to make it a little easier. Speed is something that takes time to overcome, right? Like you have to get comfortable with speed if you want to descend fast. So you never want to go really outside of your comfort range there. You go up to the upper edge of it. But things you can do is when you're descending, instead of being so what happens is you're sitting up and you're on the hoods of your handlebars and you're descending, so you feel top heavy, and that makes people feel nervous because you feel like you're over the front of the bike. So what you can do is if you slide to the back of the saddle and then lower yourself down, it effectively changes the center of gravity. What you want to do is your weight should always be centered over the crank. So if the bike is going up, right, then you slide back, but you lean forward and brings your chest up over your body, over your crank. If you're descending, you slide your butt back and then now your butt is over the crank, right? It's no longer your chest. So the more you can keep in relation to the center of the bike and keep your mass down closer to the bike, the sturdier the bike will become. Like if I'm descending and I can see and it's relatively smooth, I actually sit on the top tube of my bike. I get off the saddle and sit on the top tube and get tucked basically behind the handlebars. It's the most aerodynamically sound, which makes it faster, but it also puts all of my weight really, really low. So the bike is not twitchy, it's not moving, it doesn't do anything. That's higher level stuff. But if you can just slide your butt back a little bit and then lower yourself, just bend your arms. Instead of being locked out, just bend your arms, to a 30-degree angle, allow a 30-degree bend in your arms. You're going to lower your center of gravity and it should get smoother. But like I said, the speed side of it is really you just have to practice getting used to speed. Let's see. Come on, guys. We can't have dead air here. If we have dead air,
I have a question about the TT bike versus the road bike, right? Mm-hmm. I was talking to someone about this the other day, right?
Sure.
So is it better if it's a hilly course to ride your road bike as opposed to your time trial bike? It doesn't really make a difference. I mean, you're in a race. It doesn't make a difference.
So 99% of race courses, the TT bike is going to be faster. A time trial bike climbs as well or better than a road bike up to about an 8% grade. And that's just because of the aerodynamic advantages of the bike. Now, if it's a really hilly course with fast downhills, a lot of people are less comfortable going downhill on a time trial bike because the geometry is different. It's longer, you're kind of laid more out front. In that case, a road bike would be more comfortable. Like I will always ride a road bike here in Maryland when we do Savage Man Triathlon. It's the hilliest bike course on the planet for half Ironman. So I don't even consider bringing my time trial bike. The pros bring their time trial bikes for that race. And that race is one of the ones that you're on the edge of which it could be. But I know I'm more comfortable and can descend better and climb the longer climbs better on my road bike than my time trial bike. But purely performance-wise, the TT bike will almost always outperform the road bike on any course that's made in triathlon, because they do dumb the courses down a little bit, so to speak. They're not near as crazy as they were 10 years ago, where we did all this stupid stuff and like Savage Man was created and, that kind of stuff. But it becomes also a matter of comfort. If you're not comfortable descending on a time trial bike, a road bike, you're going to be more comfortable. So
there are two questions in the queue. From Ray, he says, you said in an earlier webinar to do some core work to help your posture. Do you have any specific core exercises we should do?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few that I recommend. So one of them is like a plank, oddly enough, is a great exercise. Like it's simple. Everybody knows how to do a plank, right? Well, a plank, when you're in a plank position, that's essentially the same position that you should be in on a tri bike, or if you're in your drops on a road bike. So it's great for that. What I actually will do is I will do my planks in a TRX. I have a TRX hanging thing, and I'll put my forearms in there because it's less stable and it's a more similar feeling to being on my race bike as well. So I'll do a plank for that. Another one that is really good is called Superman. I'm sure a lot of people have seen those. You lay on your stomach and you put your arms and your legs out. And then the idea is to raise your arms and legs up off the floor. So that engages everything in your lower back and all the deeper internal muscles. Planks are great for abs and going to the beach and big muscles and primary stability. But the smaller, deeper muscles are the ones that usually fatigue first. So if you can engage those, that's great. And Superman is great for that. Also, both of those go a long way for swimming form as well. Your lower back is primarily what keeps your legs up when you swim. So Superman's, or there's a thing called a bird dog, where you get on your hands and your knees, and then you would raise your right arm straight out and then extend your left leg out. So you're doing alternating limbs. Very simple to do. It's from your hands and your knees, so it doesn't really require a lot of flexibility, but engages almost everything in your core. And that, along with Superman, is also great if you're someone like me who has lower back issues, because anything you can do to stabilize around your spine and your lower back will help alleviate a lot of that pain as well if you deal with any of that. So that's three that you can do. You could bang out a circuit of those in 5 minutes. And, if you could throw that in, like, call it 3 days a week while you're sitting, you ate dinner and now you're sitting down, crashing, watching TV before bed or catching up on whatever, get on the floor and do 5 minutes of that stuff, and it'll make a huge difference in how you feel.
That's great. Really great. So we have another question from Sandy. She says, I only use my back gears. I don't know when to use the big gears or the small gears. I run out of gears on flats. Right now I have my front in the small wheel and then just shift with the rear gears. Makes sense? Never had any gear training. Thanks.
Sure. So your flat ground, you run out of gears, meaning that you go all the way down to the bottom and then you have nothing left, as I'm assuming what you're meaning. That's a great time to switch the one in the front to the bigger gear. So flat ground, almost everybody can ride in the biggest ring and then use the gears in the back when you're on flat ground. If you're looking for kind of a basic rule of thumb, flat ground, you should be in the biggest gear in the front. When you're going uphill, you should be in the smaller gear in the front. Okay, that's just kind of a general rule of thumb. if you're going downhill, it doesn't typically matter much. Most amateurs are exhausted when they get over the top of a hill, so they coast down. Even if they're not braking, they just use it to catch their breath. So making that immediate shift isn't really a requirement, but so bigger gear in the front on the flats, smaller one when you're going uphill. And when you're shifting the back, you should always be shifting preemptively. So like I was saying about getting cadence up or whatever, but whatever the cadence is you're happening to be riding at, you should be going through your gears so that that is not changing. If you're doing, say, 80 and you're going, 80 RPMs and you're going into a hill and your legs are starting to slow down, then you should already be shifting. You want to try to maintain that as long as you can, because then you're using momentum and leverage of the pedals and things like that to kind of keep your momentum going instead of hitting a hill and dying and then having to kind of push yourself up it, so to speak.
So she said she's learning so much. She said that alone helps. She says she's afraid of cross chaining. What exactly is cross chaining?
So cross chaining in purest form would be if you're in the outside ring or the biggest ring on the front, and then you're in the easiest gear in the back, or you're in the smallest gear in the front and the hardest gear in the back. Cross chaining is not going to hurt anything. It does speed up wear of the chain. Most people might change their chain once a year, maybe. So the added wear of that, you are never going to notice it because you're probably not riding enough. I have raced almost everything on the planet at this point. I cross-chain the heck out of my stuff because it's not going to affect efficiency. All that happens is the chain kind of rubs on the side of the derailleur. It's never going to hurt the derailleur. It just accelerates the wear on the chain. But as long as you're doing somewhat regular maintenance, whether it's taking your bike to the shop once a year or twice a year for a tune-up or whatever, they're going to tell you when your chain is worn out anyway, and you're not going to do any permanent damage. So don't fear that.
Just forget about that. Just let it go, right?
Yep, I cross chain all the time.
So she's also saying if you're in the big chain, flats would be rare to do. On the trainer, big wheels?
So if you're riding on the trainer, I would say it depends on the purpose of your workout, and it also depends on your trainer. If you have one that has the wheel stays on and you crank the roller up to it, the tension on those varies depending on how many times how tight you crank that on there. So you may not realistically be able to ride your big ring because it's got so much tension on it. Or if the tension is super light, you may have to ride in the bigger ring on the front because otherwise you'll just spin out of it. Excuse me. I use a trainer that, has its own cassette built on it, and I have no rear wheel. I use a kicker, a Wahoo kicker. And so when I ride in, say, Zwift, which is where I do any of my trainer riding because otherwise I would get bored and just give up because I hate the trainer, I'll use big ring, small ring. I'll shift around just like as if I'm riding outside. So without knowing how the tension is set up on trainer, it's kind of hard to say. But if you ride the trainer with a purpose, as in whether it's meant to be an easy ride or meant to be a harder ride or anything like that, like I said about having a plan, that will also dictate, the gearing you should be riding. If you're trying to do hard work and strength work, you should be riding in the big ring and riding a harder gear. If you're recovering because you did a lot over the weekend and you're mindlessly watching TV, use your smaller ring and just keep it nice and light, and just kind of move your legs and flush things.
So at this point, I know there's another question on the table, but I think that you could probably take these questions individually. So Coach Tim, why don't you provide your email address and phone number in case anybody wants to contact you?
Yeah, of course. you guys can like she said, you can email me. It's at coachtim@cbmultisport.com. And I will put, she sent the link on the Facebook group for this. I'll post my contact information in there as well to make it easier. Or you can send me a Facebook message through there because I'm on the group. Or you can, my phone number is 410-446-3922 if you want to send me a message or something. And I'll be happy. Like, the questions don't have to end once this is closed out. I'm a sponsor of this group and I'm here to help you guys. So it could be a question about anything across swim, cycle, run, nutrition, gear, apparel, whatever. I'm here to help you guys. So please always feel free to reach out and I will point you in the right direction, and help you guys out as best.
Coach Tim, you are amazing. Every time I hear you, I am so in awe of what you have to say. You're just like so spot on. And Sandy agrees. She said she learned so much. I've
been doing it a long time. Worked with a lot of people and made all of the mistakes myself already.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And thank you all for joining us. This is Hillary Topper with Coach Tim Dells of CBMultisport. We're tuning out, and we'll see you next week on All About the Run.
That's right. Thank you guys. Have a good day.